and welcome to this week's Riks Round Up. In the panel today is Elias Norgren and Peter Kleppe, both editors for Riks Europe, amongst other things. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So today we talk about Mario Draghi, we talk about EU officials' push for an extra 350 billion euro. We'll talk about why. Brazil asks EU to hold off on implementing deforestation law, and also Germany introducing border checks. So to start off with Mario Draghi, why was he in the news this week, Peter?
So Mario Draghi is the former Prime Minister of Italy and the former President of the European Central Bank. The European Commission has asked Draghi to come up with a report on how to improve the European Union's competitiveness. This is a big problem. We see many factory closures. Energy prices are way too high. So in his report, Draghi proposes a massive extra 800 billion euro of spending. I mean, he labels it investment. And he wants to finance this by the European Union taking on new debts. So the EU has already taken on debt, even if this was probably not 100% legal. They did it anyway. So Draghi now wants an extra 800 billion. He does in his report say some, I would say, more sensible things as well. Like he said that the EU is really destroying its own companies. I mean, it's quite something, you know, for somebody who is so mainstream as Mario Draghi to say that. And he clarified that this was because of the data regulation of the European Union, the GDPR, which is constraining digital innovation, particularly artificial intelligence. Because if you want to innovate in AI, artificial intelligence, you need lots and lots of data. And the last thing you want is ever more bureaucracy to deal with processing these data. So I think that was kind of good. But the real problem is that, you know, he was supporting more debt. And interestingly, the same week, the European Commission came up with a proposal to refinance the part of the debts that the EU had already been taken on. So instead of basically paying back the debt, the EU says, oh, let's just take a new loan to pay back the old loan. I don't think any normal person would do that. So I think this is quite irresponsible, and it would also make the recovery scheme, the former, you know, big spending plan of the EU, which is financed with debt, it would make it permanent. Whereas at the beginning they had claimed that this would be a one-off, that this would be not be repeated. So in some this week we've seen a lot of you know, push for more and more power and money for the European Union.
Well, they call this a Marshall Plan, referring, of course, to the American funding of the European continent after the Second World War. Of course, only the difference was that in that time, the EU, Europe as a whole, was not over-regulated. It was not burdened by bureaucratic mania, essentially, to the extent that it is right now. So the idea that a whole lot of public money being put into all of these industries and hoping for innovation and growth to come out of it is just wish making, really. I think there's a naivety to all of these plans that all of these politicians are constantly agreeing with. And it's straining also the relationship between the EU and many of the member countries. For example, Sweden, where the so-called COVID relief fund was a major political issue and may have swayed anti-EU opinions all the way to the might have spurned anti-EU opinions, essentially. And I actually remember reading in the Swedish newspaper about this particular new scheme that was presented, that they held off on presenting this until after the election. Otherwise, it would have affected EU opinion in a negative way. According to these federalists that are constantly asking for more money for all of these projects.
So moving on to the next topic, Peter, there's been news about Brazil wanting EU to hold off on the new deforestation law. Could you tell us more about this?
Well, this is actually a big topic, but it doesn't really catch so much attention. So the European Union has come up with new rules to combat deforestation. You know, in itself, of course, that's a laudable aim. It's a good idea, but it's really putting the EU against all its trade partners. The United States has already said, look, you have to postpone this thing. This legislation imposes a lot of bureaucracy on especially small businesses, ranging from coffee producers to soy to palm oil. Indonesia and Malaysia, they have already been heavily criticizing the EU for this. They found it very unfair that despite NGOs concluding that they had made a lot of progress in deforestation, that nevertheless the EU does not want to recognize the Malaysian standards. They say, no, you have to implement a whole range of new bureaucracy. And now Brazil is joining the core. And on top of that, the Director General of the World Trade Organization has also urged the EU not to move forward with this. So these are basically new green rules that this time are not, burdening energy and making energy more expensive, but are risking, the good trade relations that the European Union has with the rest of the world. And it would be naive to think that these trading partners will at some point not retaliate. So I think this is really really important, and it shows that the European Union is sadly no longer, or less and less, a friend of global trade.
It's really symptomatic of Europe having been a developed continent for such a long time that they can't really relate to what it is to be a country like Brazil, where you have to ostensibly make you have to deforestate to some extent, of course, not to harm the ecological balance of the region. There's always a balance to be struck naturally, but I think that green ideologues and modern ecological thinking has really hampered Europe's relationship with how these things are carried out in countries where there actually is rainforest, for example. So Brazil is one example, of course, much of Southeast Asia as well. And this is really beginning to become a headache, I think, for the EU's relationship to the rest of the world, that they have this very narrow way of thinking, that everything has to be done according to their standards and according to their progressive ideals. I'm not saying that Brazil or any other country should just massively accelerate deforestation, but there is obviously economic development that has to be made in these countries. Presumably, maybe also these regions will reforestate themselves, as happened with Europe after the Industrial Revolution and all of the deforestation that happened in relationship with the expanding population. Europe has to a large extent reforestated, which is a rather sometimes ignored fact in the debate about climate change and ecological balance. I think that this will also happen in many of these tropical countries that the EU is targeting and antagonizing with these practices, these policies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, trade is about trust. You have to trust the standards of your trading partners. Because otherwise, you may as well just shut the border completely for global trade.
Moving on to the final topic for today, Germany introducing new border checks. Elias, what is the main reason behind this?
Well, the reason is, of course, the massive growth of the AfD and other immigration critical movements in Germany that have received a massive support recently by Germans because due to the increase in stabbing attacks carried out by migrants with Islamic motives, terrorist motives, and all these different sort of issues that arise from the multicultural society. Now, Germany is backpedaling this way from the very liberal migration policies that they've had in the past. And it's something that you in Sweden would call a paradigm shift. It's really that Germany is setting the tone probably for the future of migration in Europe by doing this, because this is a very drastic move. Most other countries in Europe that have elected right-wing governments with a very staunch immigration critical view on things, such as Sweden, for example, also Italy, has not succeeded in closing their borders entirely. And there's a lot of debate as to what is this actually legal to do? Can we do this by when we're adhering to various international conventions? And there are issues like that being raised. Germany is very serious about taking this step, is the signals I'm getting from this, because of course the Olaf Scholz government is very heavily under pressure right now because it's extremely unpopular and it's losing. It's essentially been voted out in many regional constituencies, and it's a major problem that he's probably going to that Olaf Scholz has probably realized that the migration route that Germany has taken has been more or less fatal to his country and his party's political future.
Well, yes, I agree. This is quite significant. Now, the thing is, will it actually do something to stop the migration chaos? And I don't think so. Germany wants to stop the migrants at the border and then send them back to the EU member state where they come from. Now, Austria has already said that they will not take back any migrants. Bulgaria, Italy, these frontier states, they don't take back migrants or almost nobody, even if they are obliged to do so according to EU rules. So I think the only thing that works to protect the external border is to do what Australia has done now for 2 decades already, to send people that enter illegally to a territory outside of the territory of the European Union. And of course, for that, you need to negotiate a deal, maybe with Rwanda. Rwanda has repeated it is open to do such a deal with the EU and with Germany, maybe with another country. There's many conditions, of course, that need to be fulfilled. It's interesting to see Giorgia Meloni, Italy, now trying something similar with Albania. May legally be easier because Albania is a member of the European Convention for Human Rights, so the lawyers will have a more difficult time to obstruct this. But in the first place, of course, we need politicians in Western Europe finally embracing the Australian solution. Australia is a first world country. It had the same challenges, and it managed for 2 decades now to stop illegal migration. You can only wonder why our politicians are not looking into the same solution. Even for the migrants themselves, this is the best approach, because in the last 2 decades, when Australia was stopping illegal migration, 30,000 people have died at sea in the Mediterranean. This is tragic, and it tells you everything you need to know about Europe being morally superior or anything.
I agree that having a third party country accepting migrants in lieu of the European Union is a probably preferable and more maintainable solution, because migrants are always going to be coming to Europe in order to find that one country that is going to accept them. So, but I believe that this German opening towards closing the border and also solving this deal with Rwanda to accept these migrants is a very major step that could only it's going to resonate across Europe, because this is Germany, the leading nation in the EU, arguably, and also the leading nation in migrant issues to a large extent. Ever since the migration crisis began, Germany has been the loudest voice in for example, in the cries to open the borders, for example. And they run a lot of these policies purely by their sheer weight in the European institutions, all of their MEPs and all of these things. I think there's a lot of factors at play here, and it's a really major step for Europe that we can expect to. I think we can expect more countries to be taking this direction, and that's when the third party country solutions will come into action more effectively than they have so far.
Thank you so much, Elias Norgren and Peter Kleppe, for this week's Riks Roundup.
Thank you.
And thank you as always for watching Riks Roundup.